Every morning, Maria watched from her small taco cart as a thin boy wandered the streets of San Antonio, Texas. She never asked questions. She simply fed him. But one summer afternoon, 4 black SUVs rolled up to her cart, and everything changed. The doors opened, and out stepped a man in an expensive suit, someone she'd never seen before. He walked straight toward the boy, his face turning pale as recognition struck him like lightning. Who was this mysterious man? What was his connection to the homeless child Maria had been feeding? And how would one woman's simple act of kindness unravel a story of lost love, hidden family, and unexpected redemption? If you're enjoying Carlos's story, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed an act of unexpected kindness? We'd love to hear from you. Try to watch the story finish so that you will never miss next one, and tell me in the comment which party of country or state you are watching from. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked sidewalk as 6-year-old Carlos walked alone through the streets of San Antonio. His small feet shuffled past colorful murals and busy shops, but he saw none of the beauty around him. His stomach ached with familiar hunger, and his mind focused on only one thing: finding food for his mother. "I must find something today," he whispered to himself, his voice barely audible over the traffic. "Mama needs to eat." Carlos's mother, Rosa, lay weak in an abandoned warehouse they called home. Kidney disease had stolen her strength, her savings, and eventually their apartment. Now they survived in a dusty corner of the forgotten building, where Rosa spent her days too weak to stand. Life hadn't always been this cruel to Rosa. Years ago, she'd owned a small bakery near the university, a cheerful place filled with the smell of fresh bread and pastries. She'd worked hard after graduation, building something of her own, creating a future she could be proud of. Back then, she'd also been in love. His name was Daniel. They'd met in college, 2 dreamers sharing coffee between classes and planning their futures together. Daniel had brilliance in his eyes and ambition in his heart. He wanted to study abroad, to earn his master's degree, but he lacked the funds to make it happen. Rosa believed in him completely. When Daniel received a scholarship but couldn't afford the travel documents and expenses, she didn't hesitate. She emptied her savings account, gave him nearly everything she had. "Daniel, don't worry," she told him, holding his hands. "Your dreams are worth it. One day, we'll both succeed." "Thank you, Rosa," he'd said, his voice thick with gratitude. "I promise I'll make you proud. I'll make this worth it." When Daniel finally left for his program overseas, they spoke every single day. Rosa would smile at her phone, hearing his excited voice describing his new life. She felt certain their future together was just beginning. Then, without warning, the calls stopped. 2 weeks after his arrival abroad, Daniel went silent. Rosa tried calling, once, twice, dozens of times. Nothing. She sent messages that went unanswered. She lay awake at night, worry consuming her. "Why can't I reach him?" she asked the empty room. "What happened?" No explanation ever came. And then, 2 weeks after that, Rosa's body began changing. She felt exhausted, nauseous, different. A visit to the clinic confirmed what she both hoped and feared: she was pregnant. Pregnant. Rosa had whispered to the doctor, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. "How will I raise this child alone?" But Rosa made her choice. She would have this baby, even without Daniel, even without understanding why he'd disappeared. 9 months later, she gave birth to a beautiful boy. She named him Carlos. For a while, despite everything, they managed. Carlos grew into a bright, cheerful child. When he started kindergarten, Rosa worked extra hours at the bakery to pay the fees and buy him small treats. They weren't wealthy, but they had each other, and that felt like enough. Then, when Carlos turned 4, Rosa's health began failing. The exhaustion she'd attributed to single motherhood deepened into something frightening. Her legs grew heavy. Her stomach hurt constantly. Some mornings, she could barely lift her head from the pillow. One terrifying afternoon, Rosa tried to get water from the kitchen and collapsed. Carlos, only 4 years old, grabbed her shirt with his tiny hands, trying to help her stay upright. "Mama, what's wrong?" he'd cried, his young eyes wide with fear. Rosa forced a smile through her pain. "It's okay, sweetie. Mama's just tired. Don't worry." But worry was exactly what she felt when the hospital tests came back. The doctor's words still echoed in her memory. "Rosa, you have kidney failure. You need a transplant eventually, and until then, you require dialysis twice weekly." "How much will this cost?" Rosa had asked, already knowing the answer would destroy her. "A lot," the doctor said gently. "And the transplant itself, you'd need to travel out of state, possibly out of the country, for the best care." Rosa tried everything. She worked when her body allowed it, but dialysis appointments drained her energy and her bank account. Slowly, over 2 painful years, her savings vanished. She sold her bakery equipment, her furniture, everything of value. Still, it wasn't enough. When Rosa could no longer pay rent, when Carlos's school fees became impossible, when even food became a luxury they couldn't afford, they lost their home. Rosa cried as she carried her son away from their apartment, away from everything familiar. They found shelter in an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city. Rosa cleaned a corner as best she could, creating a small space they could call theirs. But now, with no income and no strength, with Rosa lying helpless most days, 6-year-old Carlos had no choice but to walk the streets, hoping anyone, would help them survive another day. This morning, like every morning, Carlos whispered his prayer before leaving. "Mama must not be hungry today. I must find something. Anything." He stepped into the bright Texas sunshine and began his lonely walk, not knowing that today would be different. Today, someone would finally see him. Maria wiped sweat from her forehead as she adjusted the heat under her portable griddle. Her taco cart sat on a busy corner of downtown San Antonio, a humble operation she'd built with her own hands and determination. At 25, she worked 7 days a week, serving tacos al pastor, carne asada, and fresh salsa to customers who appreciated good food at honest prices. The cart wasn't much, a converted metal frame with wheels, a small cooking surface, and a hand-painted sign reading Maria's Tacos, but it represented everything she'd worked for. This cart paid her rent, and one day, she hoped, it would pay for her return to college. Maria had dropped out of community college 2 years earlier when her father fell ill. Someone had needed to work, to keep the family afloat, and that someone had been her. Now, with her father recovered but her savings depleted, she worked every day with a quiet dream burning in her heart: save enough money to finish her education. Every night, she returned to her tiny studio apartment, counted her earnings, and dropped bills into an old coffee tin she kept hidden under her bed. "Please grow," she whispered to the money, knowing it never grew fast enough. Rent had increased. Food costs had risen. Her dream felt further away each month. But Maria didn't complain. She smiled at her customers, served her food with pride, and told herself to keep trying. This particular morning started like any other. Maria arrived at her corner spot before dawn, set up her cart, and began prepping ingredients. By mid-morning, the breakfast rush had ended, leaving her with a brief moment to rest and clean. As she washed dishes in a plastic basin, something caught her attention. A small figure sat on the low wall beside her cart, a boy, maybe 6 years old, sitting perfectly still. His clothes looked worn and too big for his thin frame. But what struck Maria most were his eyes. Tired, sad, and far too serious for a child. Maria paused, studying him. "Who is this boy?" she wondered aloud. She dried her hands and walked over slowly, crouching down to meet his gaze. "Hello," she said gently. "My name is Maria. What's your name?" The boy looked up slowly. "Carlos," he answered quietly. Maria smiled. "Carlos. That's a nice name. Why are you sitting here all alone? Are you waiting for someone?" Carlos looked down at his small hands, rubbing them together nervously. After a moment, he spoke just above a whisper. I'm hungry." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. She looked at this child, really looked at him, and saw something beyond ordinary hunger. She saw desperation, pain, and a burden no child should carry. Without hesitation, Maria stood and hurried to her cart. "Let me get you something to eat," she said firmly. She quickly assembled a taco, adding extra meat and cheese, wrapping it carefully in foil. When she returned, she held it out to Carlos. "Here you go, Carlos. Eat." Carlos's face brightened slightly. "Thank you, Señora," he said, gratitude filling his young voice. But instead of eating, Carlos looked up at her with a question that confused her. "Señora, please, do you have a bag or container?" Maria blinked. "Why?" she asked. Carlos held the taco close to his chest. "I want to take it home." Maria's heart squeezed painfully. She didn't fully understand, but she knew this boy was telling the truth. She went back to her cart, found a plastic container, and carefully repacked the food. "Here," she said, handing it to him. "Hold it carefully, okay?" Carlos took the container as if it were precious treasure. "Thank you, Señora. Thank you so much." Then, without warning, he turned and ran. Not walked, but ran, disappearing down the street with urgent speed. Maria stood in her spot, watching him go, confusion and concern swirling in her mind. Why is he in such a hurry? She wondered. What is this boy hiding? She returned to her work, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Carlos. His thin arms. His serious face. The way he'd asked to take the food home rather than eat it himself. Something was wrong in that child's life. Something painful. And from that moment forward, Maria couldn't stop thinking about the boy with the hungry eyes. Carlos ran through the streets as fast as his little legs could carry him, the precious container clutched tightly in both hands. He dodged pedestrians and carefully crossed intersections, his heart pounding with a mixture of exhaustion and hope. When he finally reached the abandoned warehouse, he slipped through a gap in the fence and hurried to their corner room. "Mama, I'm back," he called softly as he pushed aside the cardboard they used as a door. Rosa lay on a thin mat, her eyes half closed, her breathing shallow. She'd barely eaten in 2 days, and her body had almost no strength left. At the sound of Carlos's voice, she tried to lift her head. "Carlos," she whispered. "Welcome home, mi hijo." Carlos quickly set down the container and went to the corner where they kept a few plastic plates. With his small hands shaking slightly, he washed one plate using water from a jug, trying his best to make it clean. He carefully transferred the taco onto the plate and brought it to his mother. "Mama, please eat," he said gently. Rosa looked at the food with weak eyes. She wanted to ask where it came from, but she barely had the energy to speak. Her hands trembled too much to hold anything. Carlos understood. He'd been through this before. He knelt beside her and began feeding her, lifting tiny portions to her mouth, waiting patiently for her to chew and swallow. "Thank you, mi hijo," Rosa managed to whisper between bites. "Mama, eat more, please," Carlos encouraged softly. When she'd eaten what she could, Carlos gave her small sips of water, holding the cup steady against her lips. Then he took a clean cloth and gently wiped her mouth, the way she used to do for him when he was younger. Only after caring for his mother did Carlos serve himself a small portion. He didn't sit on the mat with her. Instead, he went to the opposite corner and sat on the bare concrete floor, eating slowly while staring out the broken window. He thought about school. He remembered his classroom, his teacher, the other children. He missed learning, missed playing, missed being a normal child. But ever since Mama got sick, there'd been no money for fees. He'd had to grow up too fast. Later that evening, when Rosa had regained a little strength, she turned her head toward him. "Carlos," she said quietly, "where did you get the food?" Carlos moved closer and sat beside her, still holding the empty container. "Mama, there's a taco cart by the big street. I was sitting on the wall because I was tired. A lady came out. Her name is Señora Maria. She saw me and asked my name. I told her I was hungry, and she went inside and brought me food." Rosa's eyes filled with tears. Maria, she repeated softly. You didn't know her before? No, Mama. I never saw her before. She just helped me. When she gave me the food, I asked if she had a container because I wanted to bring it home to you. Tears slipped down Rosa's thin cheeks. God bless her, she whispered. May God bless that woman. May she never suffer. May she never lack anything she needs. Carlos looked at his mother quietly, his small heart hurting at seeing her cry. He crawled closer and wrapped his arms around her. Mama, don't cry. I'm here. Rosa held him weakly. I know, mi hijo. I know. They stayed like that, mother and son, holding each other in the dim warehouse until sleep finally claimed them both. The next morning, Carlos woke early as always. He looked at his mother, still sleeping, still weak, and made his decision. He would go back to Maria's cart. Maybe she would help him again. He stepped out into the already warm morning and began walking toward downtown. When he reached the busy corner, he saw Maria setting up her cart, moving efficiently as she prepared for the day. Carlos hesitated. He didn't want to bother her. He didn't want to seem like he was taking advantage. So instead of approaching directly, he simply sat on the same wall as before and waited quietly. Maria was chopping onions when she glanced up and spotted him. Her face broke into a surprised smile. Carlos, she called out. Carlos stood slowly and walked toward her, his head slightly bowed. Good morning, Señora Maria, he said politely. Maria set down her knife and came closer, studying his face. Carlos, I didn't see you yesterday afternoon. Where did you go? Carlos shifted his feet nervously. I was walking around, asking people for help, trying to get something for me and my mama. Maria's expression softened with concern. Your mama? Is she okay? Carlos shook his head slowly. No, Señora. She's not okay. She can't walk well. She's always tired. She's very sick. Maria felt her chest tighten. What kind of sickness does she have? Carlos swallowed hard. She can't stand up for long. She lies down all day. The doctor said she needs treatment, but we don't have money for anything. Maria felt tears prick her eyes. She placed her hand gently on Carlos's thin shoulder. Carlos, listen to me. You don't have to walk around begging anymore. Come here every day. Every single day. I'll make sure you have food. Carlos looked up quickly, his eyes wide. Every day. Yes, Maria said firmly. Every day. I don't have much, but I won't let you and your mama go hungry. Carlos's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, Señora Maria. Thank you so much. Wait here, Maria said. She went to her cart and prepared 2 containers, one for Carlos and one for his mother. She packed them generously, adding extra tortillas and salsa. When she returned, she bent down and handed him the containers. Hold them carefully, okay? Carlos took them with both hands. Thank you, he whispered again. Maria looked at him closely. His face was too thin. His lips looked dry. She suddenly realized he probably hadn't eaten yet today. Carlos, she said gently, you can't go home on an empty stomach. Sit down. Carlos blinked. But, Señora Maria. No, she interrupted softly. Sit. You need to eat now. She went back inside and brought out her own lunch, the meal she'd prepared for herself that morning. She placed it in front of him. Eat this. You're just a child. Your body needs strength. Carlos stared at the food, then at Maria, his eyes filling with wonder and gratitude. He sat slowly and began eating, taking small, careful bites, as if he wanted the food to last forever. Maria watched him quietly, her heart breaking for this little boy. What kind of life is he living? She wondered. What has he been through? And in that moment, she understood something important. Carlos didn't just need food. He needed someone who cared. Someone who saw him not as a problem, but as a person. Without realizing it, Maria was becoming exactly that person. 3 weeks passed, and Carlos came to Maria's taco cart almost every single day. Each morning, Maria greeted him with a warm smile and a hot meal. Each evening, he left with containers for himself and his mother, his small face lit with gratitude. But something else began happening during those 3 weeks, something neither of them had planned. Carlos started helping. It began small. One afternoon, Maria was washing a pile of plates when Carlos walked up beside her and said quietly, "Señora Maria, let me help you." Maria shook her head. "No, Carlos. You're just a child. You should rest." But Carlos insisted. "You help me, señora. I want to help you too." Before she could protest further, his small hands were already reaching for a plate, carefully washing it with soap and water. Maria smiled despite herself. "You're stubborn, you know that?" Carlos smiled back, a rare, genuine smile. "I know." From that day forward, Carlos became Maria's unofficial assistant. He washed plates, swept the area around the cart, and helped organize containers. He worked with a seriousness unusual for a 6-year-old, as if he understood the value of hard work far too early in life. Maria found herself looking forward to his visits. His presence brought something she hadn't expected: companionship. Working alone every day had been lonely, but now she had this bright, resilient little boy keeping her company. She started asking him questions. "Carlos, how was your night? Did your mama eat well? Are you feeling okay today?" Carlos always answered honestly, his young voice carrying a maturity that broke Maria's heart. Every evening when Carlos returned home, he would sit beside his mother and tell her everything. "Mama, today Señora Maria made chicken tacos. Mama, I helped her wash all the plates. Mama, Señora Maria is so kind." Rosa listened with soft eyes, her heart full of gratitude. "God bless that woman," she would say every time. "She is a gift to us." One afternoon, as Maria handed Carlos his usual containers, she bent down to his level and asked, "Carlos, can I meet your mama one day? I'd like to see her. I want to know how she's doing." Carlos's eyes widened in surprise. "You want to come to my house?" "Yes," Maria said with a warm smile. "Only if your mama says it's okay. I just want to visit her." That evening, Carlos ran home faster than usual. "Mama, Mama, Señora Maria wants to see you. She wants to come to our house." Rosa was shocked. "Me? Why?" "She wants to know how you're doing. She wants to meet you." Rosa smiled slowly, tears gathering in her eyes. Tell her she can come. I would love to meet the woman who's been feeding my child." 2 days later, Maria closed her cart earlier than usual. She wore a simple dress, packed extra food in a bag, and waited for Carlos to finish sweeping the area he'd insisted on cleaning. "Ready?" she asked gently. "Yes, señora," Carlos replied, taking her hand. They walked together through the busy streets, then into quieter neighborhoods, and finally to the industrial area where the abandoned warehouse sat. Maria's heart beat faster as Carlos led her through the broken fence. When they stepped inside the makeshift room, Maria had to pause. The space was small, dim, and bare except for a thin mat and a few plastic containers. And there, lying on the mat, was Rosa, thin, weak, but with kind eyes that held both pain and warmth. "Good evening, señora," Maria said softly as she entered. Rosa smiled weakly. "You must be Maria, the one my son talks about every day." "Yes, ma'am," Maria replied, bowing slightly with respect. She moved closer and knelt beside Rosa's mat. "I brought some food. I hope it helps." Rosa's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. Thank you for taking care of my boy when I couldn't." Maria took Rosa's hand gently. "He's a wonderful child. And you're not alone anymore. I'll keep helping him. I'll keep helping both of you." For the first time in months, Rosa felt something she'd almost forgotten: Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Hope that kindness still existed in the world. Maria visited several more times over the following weeks. Each visit deepened the bond between the three of them. Carlos began smiling more. His eyes looked brighter. He even laughed sometimes, something he hadn't done in so long. At home in her tiny studio, Maria lay awake at night thinking about them. She thought about Carlos's thin arms and serious face. She thought about Rosa's weak body and grateful tears. She thought about how unfair life had been to this family. Her own problems, her rent, her school savings, her uncertain future, suddenly felt less heavy. Yes, her life was hard. But at least she had her health. At least she had strength to work. Carlos and Rosa had almost nothing. Yet they had each other. And now they had her too. Maria pulled out her coffee tin savings one night and counted the bills inside. It wasn't much. It would never be enough to solve all of Rosa's medical problems. But maybe, she thought, she could help in other small ways. She fell asleep that night with a prayer on her lips. Please God, help me help them. Show me how to make their lives better. What Maria didn't know was that far across the country, someone else was praying too. Someone who'd been searching desperately for Rosa. Someone whose arrival would change everything. But that revelation was still days away, hidden in the movement of 4 black SUVs that would soon appear on Maria's quiet street corner. 3,000 miles away, in a first-class cabin flying over the American heartland, a man sat alone with a glass of wine in his hand. His suit was tailored, his watch expensive, his entire appearance radiating success. But his eyes told a different story. They looked distant, haunted, filled with regret. His name was Daniel Rivera. He stared out the window at the clouds below, his mind traveling back through the years to a time when he'd had nothing but dreams and a scholarship letter. Back then, a young woman with a bright smile had given him everything she had so he could chase those dreams. Rosa. Daniel touched his chest lightly, feeling the old ache that never quite went away. Rosa, he whispered to the empty cabin. I hope you're okay. I hope you didn't give up on me. Daniel was now the co-founder of a successful tech company. He and his business partner had developed software that revolutionized data security, and their company was now valued at over $2 billion. He'd achieved everything he'd once dreamed about. Everything except the one thing that mattered most: finding Rosa. When he'd first arrived abroad years ago, everything had been perfect. He'd called Rosa every day, telling her about his classes, his new life, their future together. She'd laughed at his stories, encouraged his studies, and reminded him she believed in him. Then, disaster struck. Walking home from the library one night, Daniel had been attacked by thieves. They'd beaten him, taken his wallet, and stolen his phone. The phone that contained Rosa's number and every other important contact in his life. Daniel had been devastated. He tried everything to recover her information, visiting the phone company, checking social media, asking mutual friends, but Rosa didn't use social media much, and their mutual friends had scattered after graduation. He'd found no way to reach her. Still, he'd refused to give up. He'd worked night shifts at a restaurant while finishing his degree, saved every penny, and invested in online courses that eventually changed his trajectory. When his tech skills opened doors, when his company became successful, he'd promised himself, the moment I'm stable, I'm going back to find her. Now, finally, he was going home. The plane landed in San Antonio on a warm summer afternoon. Daniel stepped off into the Texas heat, and despite his expensive clothes and confident stride, his heart pounded with nervous energy. A black SUV waited on the tarmac, flanked by 3 security vehicles, the protection his company insisted he travel with due to his high-profile status. His driver opened the door respectfully. "Welcome back to Texas, Mr. Rivera," the driver said. Daniel nodded and slid into the air-conditioned interior. As they drove toward the city, he looked out at the familiar landscape, the sprawling suburbs, the highway signs, the skyline in the distance. Everything had changed, yet somehow it all felt the same. "Take me to the Driscoll Hotel," he instructed his driver. I need a few days to settle in before I start searching. But settling in was impossible. That night, alone in his luxury suite, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about Rosa. He pulled out his laptop and began searching for any digital trace of her existence. Nothing. The next morning, he called his driver. I need you to take me to the old neighborhood. The place where Rosa and I used to live. Yes, sir. They drove to a modest neighborhood on the east side of the city. Daniel stepped out and walked slowly through the complex where he and Rosa had shared an apartment during their final year of college. The building looked older, more worn, but still standing. Daniel approached the courtyard and stopped when he saw an elderly woman sitting on a wooden stool near one of the units. Something about her looked familiar. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said gently, walking closer. The woman looked up, squinting at him. Suddenly, her eyes widened. Daniel Rivera? Is that you?" Daniel's heart jumped. Yes, ma'am. You remember me." "Of course I remember you," she said, standing slowly. "You used to live here with Rosa." Daniel's breath caught. "Yes. Senora, please. I came back to find her. Do you know where she is now?" The elderly woman's expression turned sad. She gestured for him to sit beside her. "Daniel," she began slowly, "shortly after you left, Rosa found out she was pregnant." Daniel felt the world tilt beneath him. "Pregnant?" he whispered. "Yes. She had a baby boy. But then she got very sick. She couldn't work anymore. She couldn't pay rent. One day, she packed her things and left. Nobody knows where she went." Daniel's hands trembled. He pressed them against his knees, trying to steady himself. "She had my child," he said, his voice breaking. "She had my son, and she was sick, and I wasn't there." The elderly woman placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "She waited for you, Daniel. She tried to reach you. But when you didn't respond, when the sickness got worse, she had no choice. She had to survive." Daniel stood abruptly, his chest tight with emotion. "I have to find her. I have to find them both." "I hope you do, Mijo," the woman said softly. "I hope you do." Daniel walked back to his SUV, his mind racing. He had a son. A child he'd never met. A child who'd grown up without a father because of circumstances beyond anyone's control. And Rosa, his Rosa, had suffered alone, raising their child, fighting illness, losing everything. "No more," Daniel said firmly to himself as he climbed into the vehicle. "I won't stop until I find them. I won't rest until they're safe." He pulled out his phone and called his driver. "I need you to research local hospitals in low-income areas. I want to make donations to help sick people who can't afford treatment." "Yes, sir." "Any particular reason?" "Yes," Daniel said quietly, looking out the window. "If I can't find Rosa yet, I'll at least help people like her. People who are suffering because they can't afford medical care." His driver began making calls. Within hours, a list of potential hospitals arrived in Daniel's inbox. One location stood out, a small clinic in a neglected neighborhood on the south side. "That's where we'll start," Daniel decided. The next morning, he set out with his security convoy, determined to begin helping others while he continued his search. He had no idea that his search was about to end in the most unexpected way possible. He had no idea that tomorrow hunger would lead him to a small taco cart. And he had no idea that sitting beside that cart would be a 6-year-old boy with his mother's eyes and his own stubborn determination. The next morning, Daniel woke early in his hotel suite. He dressed in casual but expensive clothes, a fitted button-down shirt and dark jeans, and checked his phone for the address his driver had sent. "The clinic is in a remote area, sir," his driver had texted. "We should leave early to avoid traffic." Daniel agreed and headed downstairs where his convoy waited, one black SUV for him, and 3 security vehicles following behind. It was excessive for a simple hospital visit, but his company's security team insisted on the protocol. They drove through San Antonio's downtown, then into older neighborhoods with faded buildings and cracked sidewalks. The further they went, the quieter the streets became. Daniel looked out the window, his chest tightening. This is where people are really struggling, he thought. This is where Rosa might be. An hour into the drive, Daniel's stomach growled loudly. He'd been so focused on his mission that he'd skipped breakfast entirely. "Sir, are you hungry?" his driver asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. "I am," Daniel admitted. "But I don't think we'll find any nice restaurants out here. Should we turn back toward downtown?" Daniel hesitated. They were so close to the clinic. Turning back would waste hours. "No," he decided. "Let's just find something nearby. Anything clean." They continued driving slowly through the industrial area. Warehouses and abandoned buildings lined the streets. Then up ahead, Daniel spotted something unexpected. A small taco cart with a hand-painted sign reading Maria's Tacos. Smoke rose from the griddle, and the smell of cooking meat drifted through the air. "Stop here," Daniel said suddenly. All four vehicles came to a smooth halt in front of the modest cart. The sight must have been jarring. Four gleaming black SUVs pulling up to a street vendor's operation. Daniel's driver quickly stepped out and opened his door. Daniel emerged into the warm Texas morning, adjusting his sunglasses. As he approached the cart, something caught his attention. Off to the side, beside the cart, a small boy was washing plates in a plastic basin. The child worked with careful concentration, his thin arms moving methodically. Daniel stopped walking. Something about the boy pulled at him. Maybe the serious expression on such a young face, maybe the way he handled the task with unusual maturity. Daniel found himself staring. The boy looked up, noticing Daniel watching him. "What's your name?" Daniel asked gently, stepping closer. The boy straightened slightly. "Carlos," he answered in a small voice. "Carlos," Daniel repeated, nodding slowly. "That's a good name." Before he could ask anything else, a young woman approached from inside the cart area. She wore a simple apron and had her hair tied back. Her eyes showed both wariness and respect. "Good afternoon, sir," Maria said politely, though her voice carried a hint of confusion. Men in expensive clothes with security convoys didn't usually stop at her humble cart. "Welcome. What would you like to order?" Daniel glanced at her briefly, then his eyes returned to Carlos. The boy had gone back to washing plates, but there was something about him that Daniel couldn't shake. The child's focus, his thin frame, the way he worked without complaint, it reminded Daniel of his own difficult childhood. "Ma'am," Daniel said, turning his full attention to Maria, "may I ask why this boy isn't in school? Today is Monday, and it's nearly noon." Maria's polite smile faded slightly. She looked at Carlos with sad, protective eyes. "He's not in school because things are very hard for him and his mother. His mama is seriously ill. She can't work. They can't afford school fees." Daniel's expression shifted. Something in his chest tightened, a feeling he'd been carrying for days, a conviction that he needed to help people exactly like this. He looked back at Carlos, watching the child carefully rinse a plate. "Can I meet his mother?" Daniel asked quietly. Maria's posture immediately became defensive. She stepped slightly forward, positioning herself between Daniel and Carlos. "Sir, I need to know why you want to see her. I can't just let anyone follow this child home. I have to be sure your intentions are good." Daniel respected her caution. He nodded slowly. "I understand completely. I'm not here to harm anyone." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I came to this area to visit a local clinic. I'm planning to make donations for people who can't afford medical care, people who are sick and struggling. When you told me Carlos's mother is very ill, I thought maybe I could help her too." Maria studied his face, searching for dishonesty. But she saw only sincerity in his eyes. Slowly, she nodded. "Okay. If your reason is truly to help, then you can come with us. His house isn't far from here." Daniel turned to his driver and security team. Wait here. I'll go with them. Sir, we should accompany you for safety, one security guard began. No, Daniel said firmly. I don't want to intimidate anyone. Just wait here. Maria quickly locked the money box on her cart and pulled down the service window. She took Carlos's hand. Come on, Mijo. Let's take this gentleman to see your mama. Carlos looked up at Daniel with curious, uncertain eyes. But he trusted Maria, so he nodded. They walked together, Maria, Carlos, and Daniel, through dusty streets and past broken fences. The neighborhood grew more deteriorated with each block. Daniel's heart sank as he realized just how desperately people in this area needed help. Finally, they reached an abandoned warehouse. Carlos led them through a gap in the fence and toward a corner of the building where a piece of plywood served as a door. This is where we live, Carlos said simply. Daniel felt his throat tighten. A warehouse. They were living in a warehouse. Carlos pushed the plywood aside and stepped in. Mama, we have a visitor. Daniel ducked slightly and entered the dim space. It took his eyes a moment to adjust to the low light. And then he saw her. Lying on a thin mat on the concrete floor, weak and frail, was a woman. Her hair was longer than he remembered, her face thinner, her body clearly ravaged by illness. But her eyes, those eyes he'd fallen in love with years ago, were unmistakable. Daniel's entire world stopped. Rosa, he whispered, his voice barely audible. The woman on the mat stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, struggling to focus. When they finally locked onto the figure standing in the doorway, her breath caught. Daniel, she breathed, her voice weak with shock and disbelief. Time seemed to freeze. Maria and Carlos stood motionless, sensing something monumental happening but not understanding what. Daniel stumbled forward, his legs barely holding him. Rosa, it's you. It's really you. Tears began streaming down his face as reality crashed over him like a wave. He'd found her. After all these years, after all the searching, after all the regret, he'd finally found her. But the sight of her, lying helpless on the floor, clearly starving, obviously at death's door, shattered him completely. Guards! Daniel shouted suddenly, his voice cracking with urgency. Get in here. We need to get her to a hospital now. Within seconds, his security team rushed in. They assessed the situation instantly. Lift her carefully, Daniel commanded. Be gentle. We're taking her to the best hospital in the city immediately. Carlos pressed against Maria's side, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. Senora Maria, what's happening? Are we going with Mama? Maria knelt down and held his shoulders. Yes, Carlos. We're going with your Mama. Everything's going to be okay. Come with us, Daniel said to both of them, his voice desperate. Please. Come to the hospital. Maria nodded and took Carlos's hand firmly. They followed as the guards carefully lifted Rosa onto a stretcher they'd retrieved from one of the vehicles. The convoy moved fast, all 4 vehicles racing toward the city's premier medical center. Daniel sat in the lead SUV, his hands shaking, his mind reeling. He'd found her. He'd actually found her. But the question burning in his heart was, had he found her in time? The hospital emergency room exploded with activity the moment Rosa arrived. Nurses rushed forward with a gurney. Doctors began shouting orders. Daniel followed closely, refusing to leave her side even as medical staff tried to guide him to the waiting area. Sir, you need to let us work, a nurse said firmly. That's my... Daniel stopped, his voice breaking. Please. Please save her. A doctor placed a hand on his shoulder. We'll do everything we can. But you need to wait outside now. Reluctantly, Daniel stepped back and allowed them to wheel Rosa through the double doors into the emergency treatment area. In the waiting room, Maria sat with Carlos on a plastic chair. The little boy looked terrified, his small hands gripping Maria's arm. Is Mama going to be okay? Carlos whispered. The doctors are helping her, Maria said gently, though her own heart pounded with uncertainty. She's in good hands now. Daniel paced back and forth across the waiting room, his expensive shoes squeaking on the polished floor. His driver and security team stood nearby, watching him with concern. After what felt like hours but was only 40 minutes, a doctor emerged. Family of Rosa Martinez? Daniel rushed forward. Yes. I'm here for her. How is she? The doctor looked at Daniel seriously. She's stabilized for now, but her condition is critical. She has end-stage kidney failure. She needs a transplant as soon as possible. Without it. He didn't finish the sentence. Daniel's jaw tightened. Then start the process. Today. Now. I'll cover all costs. Book the best transplant center, wherever it is. I don't care about the expense. The doctor nodded slowly. I understand. But these things take time. We'll need to run tests, find compatible donors, coordinate with transplant centers. I'll donate my kidney, Daniel said without hesitation. Everyone in the waiting area turned to look at him. Sir, the doctor said carefully, that's very generous, but we'd need to test compatibility first. Then test me, Daniel interrupted. Do whatever you need to do. Just save her life. The doctor studied Daniel's determined face and nodded. All right. I'll have the nurse take your blood for testing. As the doctor walked away, Maria approached Daniel slowly. Carlos held her hand, his eyes fixed on the strange man who seemed to care so much about his mother. Sir, Maria said quietly, I need to understand something. How do you know Carlos's mother? Daniel turned to face her. His eyes were red, his face pale. He looked down at Carlos, really looked at him for the first time since the warehouse. And in that moment, Daniel saw it. The boy's eyes were roses, but his face had Daniel's strong jaw, his straight nose, his thick eyebrows. Carlos, Daniel said softly, kneeling down to the child's level. How old are you? 6, Carlos answered quietly. Daniel's heart clenched. 6 years old. Rosa had been pregnant when he'd lost contact. This boy, this brave, hard-working, serious little boy, was his son. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He looked up at Maria. I knew Rosa years ago. We were together. We were in love. But I went abroad to study, and I lost my phone. I couldn't contact her. I didn't know she was pregnant. I didn't know about Carlos. I've been searching for her ever since I came back. Maria's hands flew to her mouth. You're his father? Yes, Daniel whispered, tears streaming down his face. He turned back to Carlos. Carlos, I'm your father. I know I wasn't there before, but I'm here now. And I promise both of you, I will never leave again. Carlos stared at him with wide, confused eyes. He was only 6. He didn't fully understand what was happening. But he saw the tears on this stranger's face, and something inside him softened. You're my papa? Carlos whispered. Yes, Daniel said, his voice breaking. I'm your papa. Carlos didn't know what to do. So he did the only thing that felt right. He stepped forward and let Daniel wrap him in a hug. Daniel held his son for the first time, sobbing openly, feeling 6 years of absence crash over him like a wave. Maria turned away, wiping her own tears. Over the next 3 days, everything moved at lightning speed. Daniel hired the best medical coordinators, expedited all paperwork, and arranged for Rosa to be transferred to a world-renowned transplant center in Houston. Tests confirmed what Daniel had hoped. He was a match. The surgery was scheduled immediately. Before they left for Houston, Rosa had regained enough consciousness to speak. Daniel sat beside her hospital bed, holding her hand gently. Daniel, she whispered weakly. Is it really you? It's me, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry, Rosa. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry you suffered alone. What happened? She asked. Why did you disappear? Daniel explained everything. The attack, the stolen phone, the lost contacts, his desperate attempts to find her. Rosa listened with tears in her eyes. I thought you forgot about me, she whispered. I thought you moved on. Never, Daniel said firmly. Not for one day. I thought about you every single day. I built my company, became successful, all so I could come back and find you. Rosa squeezed his hand weakly. You found us. I found you, Daniel agreed. And now I'm going to save you. The surgery in Houston took 8 hours. Doctors worked carefully, transplanting Daniel's healthy kidney into Rosa's failing body. Both operations were successful, but recovery would take time. Carlos and Maria stayed in a hotel near the hospital, Daniel's company covering all expenses. Every day, Carlos asked, "Can I see Mama yet?" Finally, after 5 days, Rosa was strong enough for visitors. When Carlos entered her hospital room and saw his mother sitting up, color returning to her face, he burst into tears and ran to her bedside. Mama, you can sit up. Yes, mi hijo, Rosa said, her voice stronger than it had been in years. I can sit up now. Daniel stood in the doorway, his own side still bandaged from the surgery. But he was smiling, genuinely smiling, for the first time in years. Maria stood beside him, watching the family reunion with tears of joy streaming down her face. Thank you, Daniel said to her quietly. Thank you for taking care of them when I couldn't. I just did what anyone should do, Maria replied. No, Daniel said, looking at her seriously. You did what most people wouldn't. You saw a hungry child and you fed him. You didn't look away. You didn't judge. You just helped. That makes you extraordinary. Maria blushed, uncomfortable with the praise. They needed someone. I'm glad I could be that person. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Over the past few days, he'd learned Maria's story. Her struggle to save money, her dream of finishing college, her sacrifice of feeding Carlos from her own scarce resources. An idea had been forming in his mind. An idea that felt right. But first, Rosa and Carlos needed time to heal. First, his family needed to be whole again. Everything else could wait. 3 weeks passed in Houston. Rosa's recovery progressed steadily, slowly at first, then with encouraging momentum. The doctors were amazed by her resilience. Daniel recovered quickly from his surgery, his healthy body bouncing back within days. Carlos spent every possible moment in his mother's hospital room. He told her stories about Maria's taco cart, about washing dishes, about the customers who sometimes gave him tips. He told her everything he'd kept inside during those dark months in the warehouse. Rosa listened to every word, holding his hand, marveling at how brave her little boy had become. Maria visited twice during those 3 weeks, taking a bus from San Antonio to Houston. Each time, Rosa thanked her with tears in her eyes. You saved my son's life, Rosa said during the second visit. When I couldn't feed him, when I couldn't stand, you did what I couldn't do. How can I ever repay you? You don't need to repay me, Maria insisted. I'm just happy you're getting better. But Daniel was listening to every word, and his plan was taking shape. Finally, the day came when Rosa was discharged. The doctors cleared her for travel, with instructions to return for regular checkups. Daniel arranged for them to fly back to San Antonio in a private medical transport plane. No commercial flights, no crowds, just comfort and safety. When they landed in San Antonio, a car was waiting to take them directly to Daniel's mansion. Carlos pressed his face against the car window as they drove through an exclusive neighborhood filled with beautiful homes and manicured lawns. Papa, do you live here? He asked with wonder in his voice. I do, Daniel said with a smile. And now, you and your mama will live here too. Rosa looked at him with uncertain eyes. Daniel, we can't. Yes, you can, Daniel said gently but firmly. This is your home now. Our home. We're a family. The car pulled into a circular driveway in front of a stunning 2-story house with elegant architecture and a perfectly maintained garden. Carlos's eyes went wide. This is your house? Our house, Daniel corrected. Inside, the mansion was even more impressive. High ceilings, beautiful furniture, large windows that let in natural light. But Daniel had prepared something special. He led Carlos upstairs to a bedroom that had been completely transformed. The walls were painted in bright colors. There was a Roadside bed with a thick mattress and soft pillows. Shelves filled with books and toys lined one wall. A desk sat by the window, ready for homework and drawing. This is your room, Carlos, Daniel said, watching his son's face. Carlos stood frozen in the doorway, his mouth open. He'd never had his own room before. Never had his own bed. Never had toys or books that belonged just to him. It's all mine, he whispered. All yours, Daniel confirmed. Carlos walked slowly into the room, touching everything gently as if it might disappear. When he sat on the bed, he bounced slightly, amazed by how soft it was. Then suddenly, he burst into tears. Rosa hurried to his side. Carlos, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong, Mama, Carlos sobbed. Everything's right. Everything's so right. Rosa held him as he cried, tears of relief, of joy, of disbelief that their nightmare had finally ended. Daniel stood in the doorway, his own eyes wet. This was what he'd dreamed of, giving his son the childhood he deserved, giving Rosa the comfort she'd been denied. The next morning, Daniel called Maria and asked her to come to the house. When she arrived, she was stunned by the size and elegance of the property. Please come in, Daniel said warmly, leading her to the sitting room where Rosa and Carlos waited. Maria. Carlos ran to her immediately, hugging her tightly. Look at my room. Papa gave me my own room with toys and everything. Maria laughed, her eyes bright. I'm so happy for you, Carlos. When everyone was seated, Daniel cleared his throat. Maria, I asked you here because I want to talk to you about your future. Maria looked confused. My future. Rosa and Carlos told me everything you did for them, Daniel began. You fed Carlos every day from your own limited resources. You gave him food you should have sold or eaten yourself. You visited their warehouse. You cared when no one else did. Maria shifted uncomfortably. I just did what felt right. Let me finish, Daniel said gently. They also told me about your dream. You want to finish college, but you've been saving money slowly because you work every day just to survive. Maria nodded, wondering where this was going. Maria, where do you live right now? I rent a small studio apartment, Maria answered honestly. One room. It's small, but it's all I can afford. Daniel nodded slowly. And your taco cart, do you own it or lease the space? I own the cart, but I pay daily fees for the corner spot, Maria explained. Daniel leaned forward, his expression serious but kind. Maria, I want to help you the way you helped my family. Tomorrow, I'm taking you to see an apartment. A real apartment in a safe neighborhood. It's yours, rent-free, for as long as you need it. Maria's eyes widened. What? No, I can't accept. Yes, you can, Daniel interrupted gently. You deserve a safe, comfortable place to live. But that's too much. I'm not finished, Daniel continued. I also want to help you grow your food business. But I know managing a business while going to school is difficult. So I have a proposal. He pulled out a folder and handed it to Maria. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside were architectural plans for a restaurant. A real restaurant with tables, a full kitchen, proper equipment, and a sign that read Maria's Kitchen. I found a location near the University District, Daniel explained. High foot traffic. Good neighborhood. I'll handle the construction and setup. You'll own the business. I'll hire staff to run it while you're in classes. Maria stared at the plans, unable to speak. And this, Daniel continued, pulling out an envelope, is your acceptance letter. I contacted the community college. I paid your tuition for the next 2 years. You start next semester. Maria's hands shook as she opened the envelope. It was real. An official acceptance letter with her name on it. I can't. This is too much. I don't deserve, Maria stammered, tears streaming down her face. Rosa reached over and took Maria's hand. You deserve all of it. You saved my son. You gave him hope when he had none. This isn't charity, Maria. This is gratitude. Carlos climbed onto Maria's lap and hugged her. Thank you for feeding me, Señora Maria. Thank you for being nice to me. Maria held the little boy and sobbed. Deep, releasing sobs that came from years of struggle, years of working alone, years of wondering if life would ever get easier. Daniel smiled. There's one more thing. Until your restaurant opens, I want you to take a break. Rest. Prepare for school. I'll pay you a monthly salary so you don't have to worry about money. Why? Maria finally managed to ask through her tears. Why are you doing all this? Because kindness should never go unrewarded, Daniel said simply. Because you saw a hungry child and you fed him without hesitation. Because you have a good heart, Maria. And the world needs more people like you. That evening, Daniel drove Maria to her new apartment. It was in a modern building with security, an elevator, and actual amenities. The apartment itself had a bedroom, a living room, a full kitchen, and a bathroom with hot water. Maria walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, sitting on the furniture, opening and closing the cabinets. This is really mine, she kept asking. Really yours, Daniel confirmed, handing her the keys. When Maria finally sat on her new couch, a real couch, not a thin mattress on the floor, she covered her face and cried again. But these were different tears. These were tears of overwhelming relief. For the first time in years, Maria felt safe. She felt seen. She felt valued. And she understood something profound. The food she'd given Carlos hadn't just fed his body. It had planted seeds of hope that had grown into miracles she never could have imagined. Over the next 2 months, San Antonio witnessed a beautiful transformation. Not just of buildings and businesses, but of lives and hearts. Construction began on Maria's restaurant. Daniel hired the best contractors, and within 6 weeks, Maria's kitchen stood gleaming on a busy corner near the University of Texas at San Antonio. The interior featured warm lighting, comfortable seating, and a professional kitchen that made Maria's eyes water the first time she saw it. This is mine, she whispered, standing in the empty dining room before opening day. All yours, Daniel confirmed. I've hired 3 cooks, 2 servers, and a manager who'll run daily operations. You make the menu decisions and handle the creative direction. They handle the logistics while you're in class. Maria's restaurant opened on a Saturday morning. The line stretched down the block, partly because the food was delicious, partly because word had spread about the inspiring story behind it. Local news covered the opening, telling the tale of a street vendor whose kindness had changed multiple lives. Maria stood behind the counter during those first hours, overwhelmed by the support. Customers congratulated her. Some left generous tips. Others simply said, "Thank you for showing us what real kindness looks like." Meanwhile, Carlos's life transformed in equally profound ways. Daniel enrolled him in a prestigious private school with small class sizes and excellent teachers. The first day, Carlos wore a new uniform, carried a real backpack filled with school supplies, and practically vibrated with excitement. "Mama, look. I have notebooks. And pencils. And a lunchbox," he kept exclaiming. Rosa, now strong enough to walk and do light activities, kissed his forehead. "I'm so proud of you, mi hijo. Learn everything you can." At school, Carlos discovered he loved reading. His teacher noticed immediately that despite missing years of formal education, he was bright and eager to learn. Within weeks, he'd caught up to his classmates in several subjects. Every evening, Carlos came home and told his parents about his day. "Papa, we learned about the solar system. Mama, my teacher said I'm good at math." Daniel and Rosa listened to every word, their hearts full. Rosa's recovery continued steadily. She attended regular checkup appointments, and every time, the doctors marveled at her progress. The transplant had been completely successful. Her body had accepted Daniel's kidney without complications. "You're a medical success story," one doctor told her during a checkup. "You should be very proud." But Rosa felt something deeper than pride. She felt gratitude. Gratitude for Daniel's sacrifice, for Maria's kindness, for the second chance she'd been given. One evening, as Rosa was preparing dinner in Daniel's massive kitchen, still getting used to having a real stove and fresh ingredients, Daniel entered and leaned against the counter. "Rosa," he said quietly, "can we talk?" Rosa set down her knife and turned to face him. "Of course." Daniel took a deep breath. "I know we've been through so much. I know I wasn't there when you needed me most. But I'm here now, and I want to be here forever." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a beautiful diamond ring. Rosa's hands flew to her mouth. "Rosa Martinez," Daniel said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making up for the time we lost? Will you make me the happiest man alive and become my wife?" Rosa's eyes filled with tears. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Then, finally, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Daniel. Yes." Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a tight embrace. They held each other in the kitchen, both crying, both healing, both finally home. Carlos, who had been watching from the doorway, ran into the kitchen cheering. "Mama's getting married. Mama's getting married." Daniel scooped him up and spun him around. "And you're going to be my best man. What do you say?" "Yes," Carlos shouted. "Can I wear a tuxedo?" "The fanciest tuxedo in Texas," Daniel promised. 8 weeks later, they held the wedding in Daniel's garden. It was small and intimate, just close friends, Daniel's business partners, Maria, and a few of Rosa's old friends who Daniel had tracked down and invited. Rosa wore a simple but elegant white dress. Carlos, true to Daniel's promise, wore a tiny tuxedo and took his role as ring-bearer very seriously. Maria served as Rosa's maid of honor, standing beside her friend with tears of joy streaming down her face. As Daniel and Rosa exchanged vows under an arch of white flowers, everyone present felt the weight of their journey. These two people had been torn apart by circumstance, had suffered separately for years, had each struggled in darkness, but love, determination, and one woman's simple act of kindness had brought them back together. "I promise to love you every day," Daniel said, his voice strong and clear. "I promise to be the partner you deserved from the beginning. I promise to be the father Carlos needs. And I promise that you will never suffer alone again." Rosa's voice shook as she spoke her vows. "I promise to trust you, to forgive what couldn't be helped, to build a future instead of dwelling on the past. And I promise that together, we will give Carlos the life he deserves." When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," everyone applauded. Carlos jumped up and down, clapping hardest of all. At the reception, Maria gave a short speech. "I didn't know that giving a taco to a hungry child would lead to all of this," she said, looking at the gathered guests. "I just saw a little boy who needed help. But what I've learned is that kindness is never wasted. It multiplies. It spreads. It comes back to you in ways you can't imagine. Rosa, Daniel, Carlos, thank you for teaching me that love and generosity can overcome anything." The guests raised their glasses in agreement. After the wedding, Daniel began making plans for the family's future. He'd been commuting between San Antonio and Silicon Valley for his company, but he wanted to be present for Carlos's childhood. "I'm thinking about opening a branch office here in San Antonio," he told Rosa one night. "That way I can work locally and still be home for dinner every night." "You'd do that?" Rosa asked, surprised. "I've missed 6 years of Carlos's life," Daniel said firmly. "I won't miss another day if I can help it." True to his word, Daniel opened a tech hub in San Antonio, bringing jobs and innovation to the city. His company thrived, But more importantly, his family thrived. Maria, meanwhile, started her first semester of college. She attended morning classes, studied during breaks, and checked in with her restaurant in the afternoons. Her business grew steadily, not just because the food was excellent, but because people loved the story behind it. One evening, Daniel, Rosa, Carlos, and Maria all had dinner together at the mansion. As they sat around the large dining table, sharing food and laughter, Daniel raised his glass. "A toast," he said. "To Maria, whose kindness saved my family. To Rosa, whose strength kept Carlos alive. To Carlos, who never gave up hope. And to second chances. May we never take them for granted." "To second chances," everyone echoed, clinking glasses. Carlos, drinking juice from a fancy glass that made him feel very grown up, smiled at the three adults who had given him everything. "I love all of you," he said simply. And in that moment, surrounded by love and abundance, everyone present understood a fundamental truth. Wealth isn't measured in money or possessions. It's measured in the people who stand beside you, the hands that reach out when you fall, and the hearts brave enough to care when caring is difficult. They had all been broken in different ways. But together they had become whole. 2 years later, Maria stood at the podium of the University of Texas at San Antonio's graduation ceremony, her cap slightly crooked, her gown billowing in the warm Texas breeze. Her name was called, and she walked across the stage to receive her diploma, an associate's degree in business management, with plans to continue toward her bachelor's. From the audience, Daniel, Rosa, and Carlos, now 8 years old and growing tall, stood and cheered louder than anyone else in the stadium. "That's my Tia Maria," Carlos shouted proudly. He'd started calling her Aunt naturally, and the title had stuck. After the ceremony, they gathered for photos. Maria hugged her diploma to her chest, her eyes bright with accomplishment. "I did it," she kept saying. "I actually did it." "You did," Rosa said, hugging her tightly. "And we're so proud of you." Daniel smiled. "What's next? You mentioned wanting to expand the restaurant." Maria nodded excitedly. "I have ideas. Maybe a second location? Or a catering service. I've been taking business strategy classes, and I think Maria's kitchen could grow into something bigger." "Then let's make it happen," Daniel said. "I'd be happy to invest. Consider me your silent partner if you want one." Maria's restaurant had indeed become wildly successful. What started as a single location had become a San Antonio favorite, with regular customers and consistent 5-star reviews. Maria had paid back every penny Daniel had invested, despite his protests, and now ran a profitable business while completing her education. But more than success, Maria had found purpose. She'd started a program at her restaurant where she provided free meals to homeless families every Sunday. She'd partner with local shelters to identify families in need, and every week, dozens of people came to Maria's kitchen for a hot meal and kind word. "Someone helped me when I was struggling," Maria explained to a local reporter who covered the program. "Someone fed a hungry child I cared about without asking for anything in return. Now it's my turn to pay it forward." Carlos, meanwhile, had blossomed into a confident, intelligent young boy. He excelled in school, particularly in mathematics and science. His teachers regularly commented on his maturity and kindness toward other students. "Carlos helped a new student today who was having trouble with math," his teacher told Rosa during a parent-teacher conference. "He's naturally empathetic. He sees when others are struggling and reaches out." Rosa smiled, knowing exactly where that empathy came from. Carlos had lived through struggle. He understood hardship in a way most 8-year-olds didn't. And instead of making him bitter, it had made him kind. One Saturday afternoon, the whole family went to volunteer at Maria's Sunday meal program. They served food, cleaned tables, and talked with families who were going through the same struggles Rosa and Carlos had once faced. Carlos approached a little girl about his age who was sitting quietly in the corner. She looked thin and tired, her clothes worn and faded. "Hi," Carlos said gently. "My name is Carlos. What's yours?" The girl looked up shyly. Sophia. Are you hungry, Sophia? The food here is really good. My tia Maria makes the best tacos in San Antonio. Sophia nodded slowly. Carlos took her hand and led her to the serving line, making sure she got a full plate. He sat with her while she ate, telling her funny stories from school, making her smile. Daniel watched from across the room, his heart full. His son, the boy who'd once sat beside a taco cart begging for food, was now helping another child the same way he'd been helped. The cycle of kindness was continuing. That evening, back at the mansion, the family gathered in the living room. Carlos was doing homework at the coffee table. Rosa was reading a book. Maria had stopped by for dinner and was chatting with Daniel about business ideas. I've been thinking, Maria said thoughtfully. What if we created a foundation? Something that helps families facing medical hardships? We could pay for treatments, provide temporary housing, help people the way you helped Rosa. Daniel's eyes lit up. I've been thinking the exact same thing. I want to use my resources to help people who are going through what Rosa went through. Medical bills shouldn't destroy families. We could call it the Second Chances Foundation, Rosa suggested, looking up from her book. Perfect, Daniel agreed. Maria, would you want to help run it? You understand what struggling families need better than most people. Maria's eyes widened. Really? You'd trust me with something that important? Absolutely, Daniel said. You proved what you're capable of. You built a successful business while going to school. You never forgot where you came from. You're exactly the person this foundation needs. Over the next 6 months, they established the Second Chances Foundation. Daniel provided the initial funding, a substantial amount that made headlines in the business world. Maria came on board as director of operations, balancing her role with managing her restaurant. Rosa, now fully healthy and energetic, became the community outreach coordinator. The foundation focused on 3 areas: paying medical bills for families in crisis, providing temporary housing for those who'd lost their homes due to medical expenses, and offering job training for parents who needed to rebuild their careers. Within the first year, they'd helped over 150 families. Each family received personalized support, not just money, but guidance, resources, and genuine care. One day, a woman came to the foundation office with her young daughter. The woman explained that she'd been diagnosed with cancer and couldn't afford treatment while caring for her child alone. Rosa sat with her, holding her hand. I understand exactly what you're going through, Rosa said gently. I was once where you are, sick, scared, and alone with a child depending on me. But someone helped us, and now we're here to help you. The woman cried tears of relief as Rosa explained how the foundation would cover her treatment costs and provide temporary housing near the hospital. You're not alone anymore, Rosa promised. We're going to walk through this with you. When the woman left, Maria turned to Rosa with admiration. You're so good at this. You know exactly what to say. Because I lived it, Rosa replied simply. I remember what it felt like to be hopeless. I remember thinking I'd die and leave Carlos alone. Now I can make sure other people don't feel that hopelessness. The foundation grew rapidly. Daniel's tech company began partnering with them, with a percentage of profits going directly to helping families. Other businesses in San Antonio started contributing as well, inspired by the story of how one act of kindness had created such widespread positive change. Local news channels featured the foundation regularly. National media picked up the story. Daniel was invited to speak at conferences about social entrepreneurship and corporate responsibility. But Daniel always insisted on one thing. This foundation exists because a young woman named Maria saw a hungry child and fed him. She didn't have much, but she shared what she had. That's the spirit of this entire organization. That's what we're trying to multiply. 3 years after their wedding, Daniel and Rosa welcomed a new addition to the family, a baby girl they named Grace Maria Rivera. The middle name was chosen to honor the woman who'd saved their family. When Maria visited the hospital to meet baby Grace for the first time, she cried as she held the tiny infant. She's beautiful, Maria whispered. Just like her namesake, Rosa said warmly. Maria, you gave us our lives back. This baby exists because you cared about a hungry boy at your taco cart. How do we ever thank you enough for that? You already have, Maria said, smiling through tears. You treated me like family. You helped me achieve my dreams. You showed me that kindness really does come back around. That's more than enough. Carlos, now 11 years old, looked at his baby sister with protective big brother love. I'll teach her everything, he announced seriously. I'll teach her about kindness and helping people and never giving up. I know you will, Daniel said, putting his arm around his son's shoulders. You're going to be an amazing big brother. And Carlos was. As Grace grew, Carlos doted on her, played with her, and told her stories about their family's journey. Stories about Mama being sick, about living in a warehouse, about a kind woman named Tia Maria who gave them food when they had nothing. Always remember, Grace, Carlos would tell his little sister, that we help people who are struggling. Because someone once helped us. On the 5th anniversary of the foundation, they held a celebration event. Over 500 families who'd been helped by the organization attended. There were testimonials, tears, and overwhelming gratitude. Maria stood at the podium to give a speech. She looked out at the crowd, at all these families who'd been pulled back from the edge of despair, who'd been given second chances at life. 5 years ago, Maria began, I was a street vendor barely making rent. I saw a little boy sitting by my cart, and something told me to help him. I had no idea that small decision would change my entire life. I had no idea it would eventually help hundreds of other families. She paused, her voice thick with emotion. But here's what I've learned. We never know how far our kindness will reach. We never know whose life we might save with one simple act of compassion. That little boy I fed became my family. His mother became my best friend. His father became my business partner and mentor. And together, we created something that's now helping people all across Texas. The crowd applauded loudly. So my challenge to all of you is this, Maria continued. Look around for the hungry, the struggling, the people everyone else ignores. And help them. You don't need to be rich. You don't need to have a foundation. You just need to care. Because one act of kindness can change the entire trajectory of someone's life. It changed mine. It changed this family's. And it can change yours too. The applause was thunderous. People stood, clapping, many crying. After the event, the family gathered privately in a quiet room. Daniel, Rosa, Carlos, baby Grace in her stroller, and Maria sat together, exhausted but fulfilled. We did something good, Daniel said quietly. We really did. We're still doing something good, Rosa corrected. This is just the beginning. Carlos, mature beyond his years, looked around at his family. Papa, can I ask you something? Of course, son. When I grow up, can I run the foundation? I want to help families like Tia Maria helped us. I want to make sure no kid has to be hungry and scared like I was. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He pulled Carlos into a hug. Yes. Absolutely yes. This foundation will be yours one day. And I know you'll make it even better than it is now. Maria watched the family with profound contentment. She thought back to that day years ago when a thin, serious little boy had sat on the wall beside her taco cart. She remembered the moment she decided to help him, not knowing anything about him or his situation. That one decision had transformed her entire existence. She now had a successful business, a college education, a loving extended family, and a purpose that gave her life deep meaning. Thank you, Maria said softly, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to the family, to God, or to the mysterious force that had guided her toward that choice years ago. We're the ones who should be thanking you, Rosa said, reaching over to squeeze Maria's hand. No, Maria replied with a smile. We all saved each other. That's how kindness works. It's never just one way. It circles back. It multiplies. It creates families where there were strangers and hope where there was despair. Daniel raised his water bottle. To kindness, then. To second chances. To families, both the ones we're born into and the ones we choose. And to the ripple effects of caring when it would be easier to look away. To kindness, everyone echoed, clinking their bottles together. Baby Grace cooed from her stroller, and everyone laughed. Outside the window, the San Antonio sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful, a reminder that even after the darkest nights, morning always comes. Even after the hardest struggles, hope can return. And sometimes, hope arrives in the form of a simple taco from a street vendor who chose to see a hungry child instead of ignoring him. Sometimes, one moment of compassion can rewrite the entire future. This was that kind of story. This was that kind of love. And this was that kind of miracle, the everyday miracle that happens when ordinary people choose extraordinary kindness. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey from despair to hope, from hunger to abundance, from strangers to family. Carlos, Rosa, Maria, and Daniel's story reminds us that kindness is never wasted and that one person really can make a difference. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring true stories. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our next upload. Share this video with your friends and family. Everyone needs to hear stories like this. Most importantly, we challenge you. Find someone who needs help this week. Buy a meal for a homeless person. Help a struggling family. Donate to a cause you believe in. Be Maria. Be Daniel. Be the person who changes someone's story. Drop a comment below telling us, what act of kindness will you do this week? We read every single comment, and your stories inspire us to keep creating content that matters. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And thank you for being part of a community that believes in the power of human goodness. Until next time, keep spreading kindness. The world needs more people like you. God bless you all.